Hello everybody, Omni here. Yesterday I was able to catch an early viewing of Aquaman and I'm happy to say I had an awesome time watching this movie. If you've been keeping up with the channel, with our podcast or anything like that, you know how much I've been excited and looking forward to this movie. And this movie delivered. It delivered everything that I wanted from it. Um Now, don't go into this expecting like Oscar-worthy dialogue because this is a comic book movie. The dialogue itself, everything in this script is like it came right off the page. So there's some clunky, cheesy dialogue in here that probably sounds a lot better on a page than it does being delivered, but hey, everything else in this movie just delivers on all cylinders for me. Like I'm I'm saddened that I didn't get to see it on IMAX because I know the majority of this movie is shot in IMAX and the visuals alone in this movie I think are worth the price of admission because the world that they flesh out and create with these different kingdoms under the sea are just so gorgeous to look at. There's so many beautiful shots in this movie that seeing it on a smaller screen, even like if this was a home viewing and you're not going to get, this is definitely a movie theater experience you want to get with this film so you can catch all of those minute details and really take in this world. And honestly, I've never even been to an IMAX movie. So I would love this alone, this movie by itself, I would really love to see on that kind of a format. um but good lord, this movie is jam packed. And I heard some people complaining about the pacing, or like the especially the beginning. They said there was some weird pacing, but I never got any kind of a pacing issue with this movie. I feel like everything kind of connect, all the dots kind of connected, and there is a lot of exposition and a lot of background information that needs to be delivered to you in order for you to get every side to this plot. Um, Basically, the overall plot of the movie boils down to King Orm, who is the half brother of Aquaman, is trying to rally and unite the seven kingdoms against the surface world because, along with a personal vendetta he has, there's a very eco-friendly kind of message that goes along with it, with how we've been treating the oceans, the current pollution and state of the oceans even today. That's still an ongoing problem and even getting worse in a lot of cases. So there's a real reason why he feels threatened by the surface world, but he goes so far as to kind of manipulate events to kind of get people to see his way and join his cause. In those events, it kind of sparks off Mira to go off and find Aquaman and try to get him to come back and take his place on the throne. Arthur Curry, Aquaman, is actually the firstborn, and technically, despite being a half breed, is the heir to the throne of Atlantis. So, of course, the Aquaman we know at this point doesn't want anything to do with that. He just wants to do his own thing. But along the way, we see this growth from the Zack Snyder Aquaman that we were introduced to. By the end of the movie, throughout the movie, we just kind of see him build up throughout and kind of gain this greater sense of responsibility. And he kind of goes through a spurt of maturity throughout this and starts to take responsibility for his people for the everyone really. That is essentially what everything boils down to, and it turns into this Indiana Jones style quest for this trident that used to belong to the original king of Atlantis and holds the power of the seas. And the holder of the trident, by law and by rights, will be king. So we got the basic idea of the plot. So let's talk about the characters a little bit. We were introduced to Aquaman formally in Justice League, and as you can see, he's kind of like that reluctant, hard-headed brute, essentially. He just doesn't care about anybody else until it actually starts to affect him. And we kind of get that bit of Arthur in the beginning of this as well. And throughout the movie, there is a progression. There is a evolution of maturity that does happen with the character, that eventually he transitions from just being Arthur Curry to being the Aquaman. And it's a journey that I really think works, and I get it. There's some points where I'm just kind of like, it comes down to kind of like the Man of Steel thing, where there's a lot of there's a lot of there's a lot of throwaway dialogue that's just hinting at what he is and what he should be. You are the one true king, you are the heir, blah blah blah. But there's not as much kind of showing why he should be a king aside from law. So there is kind of a bit of that, where in Man of Steel, we're told how he's supposed to be. He's meant for all these great things and blah blah blah, but we never really see why Superman or Clark Kent kind of deserves or embodies that. We're just kind of told it and then expected to believe it by the end of the movie, despite any of the visual information that we get kind of conflicting with that. However, in Aquaman, there's not really a whole lot of conflicting information. It's just like, by the end of it, I don't know if he really deserved to be king, but the reason that they go with and the growth that we get, I can get behind it. He's definitely better than Orm. um, Heck, if anybody should have been king, it probably should have been Volko. But politics. Mira, awesome. I love her look. I thought her hair was going to bother me from the trailers just because of how jarring it is. I know it's supposed to be this kind of like aerial, inhuman kind of tone to it, but it in the movie didn't bother me one bit. The only complaint I have about her character is, if you know the comics, you know that there's a progression that has to happen, and it does happen throughout the movie, but it doesn't seem too natural. Like, the chemistry between Jason Momoa and Amber Heard is not that great, and I don't know if it's due to the direction or the lines themselves, because there's a lot of like George Lucas level like dialogue that comes out of her mouth that you can't really fault her for. But me, I love that kind of cheesy stuff, so it didn't bother me that much. I know for a lot of people it will probably be like cringeworthy, but I kind of bought it. I just didn't really get their chemistry a lot. There's one scene in particular, about halfway into the film, they just get a little slow little character moment together, and that scene, I think, is the most I actually felt their chemistry throughout the movie. And then it just gets interrupted by an action scene, which is fine. I'm not going to this movie to be emotionally enthralled. I'm going to this movie to see some spectacular visuals and some badass action, and this movie delivers all of that. And that's why I'm here. Along with our two leads, Amber Heard and Jason Momoa, we also have Willem Dafoe, who is playing Volko in this movie. He is kind of like, he's essentially Aquaman's mentor. He teaches him how about his powers. He teaches him about what makes him actually different from being a man, what makes him different from being a pure Atlantean. And he spends a lot of time on land training him throughout his life. So we get a lot of flashbacks that are really expertly edited in with existing present day shots that kind of blew me away in some scenes. And we cut back and we kind of see how he's been training him over these years to the point where they kind of fall apart and drift away, which leads to the Aquaman we begin with in Justice League eventually. Now, we also have his father, who is Tom Curry, who is the lighthouse keeper that finds his mother washed up. And that's how we start the movie, is we're introduced to his father and his mother, and she's washed up, Queen Atlanta. And I think their moment in the beginning of this movie, like, we kind of get this montage after they meet, which is really adorable, because she's obviously never been to the surface world, and she doesn't know what a dog is. There's a lot of, I'm not going to go into too many details, but there's a lot of like cute little slow moments with those two that they have some chemistry, way more than our leads do in this. And I think that was the most emotional part of this movie, was how it affected Arthur's dad more than anything. And Nicole Kidman is so good in this. Like, she has the best action scene, I think, in this movie, and it's in the beginning of the film. Don't get me wrong, the rest of the action scenes throughout the movie are fantastic, but the first one we get with her is just awesome. So look forward to that if you do check out this movie. Um, Aside from them, we have our villains. King Orm, aka Ocean Master, who is played by Patrick Wilson, who is definitely really tight with James Wan. This is one of many movies that they've worked on together. And this is a different kind of performance than I've ever seen him do. And it's really fun to watch him like emote and really get into this kind of like an action fantasy kind of world. And it really kind of plays out in a really fun way if you've seen any of their past work. Even though King Orm is a little bit of your cookie cutter kind of villain, you kind of do see where he's coming from. And you get his viewpoint when you kind of learn his motivations. And he kind of has like a personal reason as well for why he has kind of a vendetta against the surface dwellers. So you kind of get on board with it a little bit. Like I wouldn't say he's got the depth of any of, the recent Marvel villains like Killmonger, or definitely not Thanos, but he's up there. I think he's got the most grounded motivations that we've had out of a DC villain in quite some time. And that's enough. Visually, everything in this looks straight from the comics. Aquaman's design, Atlantis looks amazing. To the every detail in Ocean Master's wardrobe just harkens back to the comics. Like when he gets the mask and the trident and everything, it is Ocean Master from the comics. And so fulfilling. Like that's the best moments for me in these movies is when I see something from the page on the big screen. I don't care how cheesy it is, how goofy it looks. That kind of stuff just kind of brings out this childlike emotion in me that just makes me a giddy little schoolgirl. So I can appreciate every aspect about that in this movie. Along with King Orm, got Yahya Abdul-Mateen II playing Black Manta, who actually has a very legitimate reason to hate Aquaman and go after him and want to hunt him down. He's actually a very compelling little character. He's not in a bulk of the movie, but every scene he's in is just full to the brim with emotion and action, and I loved every bit of it. Especially the way they bring to life the actual Black Manta design with the big goofy helmet and the laser eyes, and they make it this kind of threatening thing, and I really enjoyed that. We do have some other characters like Dolph Lundgren, who is the king of Zibble, and also Mira's father. He's got quite a bit of screen time, a lot more than I kind of figured he would. We also branch off. We get to see each of the different kingdoms, at least the ones that are still around, because some of them have been lost to time or have gone extinct. But the different kingdoms extend to, there's Atlantis, there's Zibble, there's the Fisherman, the Brine, and the Trench. And when we go to the Trench, you've seen it in the trailers they're the really fishy, heavy, like finned, no eyes, screechy claw things that just mass at you like a swarm of piranhas. And you get that shot of them like overwhelming Mira and Arthur when they're off in that boat, and you see that beautiful shot of them with the flare diving into the water as the trench just kind of swarms in and then closes it around them. It was such a claustrophobic scene, and it was so intense. And like James Wan really got to have some fun with that one, because that's his bread and butter is horror. He's primarily a horror director, and you get to see like a lot of those elements in the sequence, and it's a lot of fun. Also, this isn't a spoiler, but there's a point in the movie where they're in this like kind of ship graveyard kind of place that's hidden outside of Atlantis. If you're very careful, you will spot the Annabelle doll floating in the water. An interesting little nod to James Wan's history. I was kind of like after that point, I was like, are we going to find the nun? So I was like looking at dark corners and stuff. Is the nun in here? We're going to find like one of the Fast and Furious cars just kind of like sunk in the ocean or something. I was just like, are there any other nods in here? James Wan, are you hiding anything else from us? We'll move on from here though, and talk about the score, which I really think accented and played very well with the kind of neon bright colored visuals that we had in this movie. It was very Blade Runner and Tron like, with the heavy electro synth music that played in the background. It gave this like this 80s fantasy, high fantasy feel to it that was very fitting, I feel like, for this movie. Aside from that, the only drawbacks I have to this movie in a whole that I'm going to go into really is, for some people it is going to be a little bit long. I left the movie kind of wondering how did I feel about this, mostly because I felt like I'd been in there forever. So it took me a little while to actually collect my thoughts on it after I left the theater. But in the end, I loved it. I just think there was a little bit of fatigue going into it because I was, unfortunately, this is mostly my fault. I was already tired myself when I went in, so that probably didn't help. But there is a lot going on. There is a lot happening in this movie. This movie doesn't take too many breaks, so it can feel a little bit of like a trek. It can be a little bit of a hike to get through this movie. But I don't, like I said, also that I don't feel like a lot of the exposition and additional information that we are given throughout the movie is unnecessary. For the story they're telling and the world that they're building, it is necessary to fill in all of those gaps to have a contained story. Now, this is truly the unlike Superman, unlike Batman, unlike Spider-Man. This Aquaman lives in a world that can exist in and of itself as its own universe, and it's never been represented on screen this way. So I understand that they needed to build everything from the ground up for this movie. So going forward, if we do get an Aquaman 2, I don't think we'll fall into any of those pitfalls because it will have been introduced to practically everything in the Aquaman world, except for whatever new they bring to it next. So I think that only comes into play because this is the first Aquaman venture that we get, the first standalone on-screen Aquaman venture that they felt this need and the story needed to have all of this chunked into this movie for us to get the coherent story by the end of it. So I don't really hold that as a fault. I just know it's going to be a negative for some people. The only other thing is, like I said, that I did not believe in the majority of this movie the chemistry between Amber Heard and Jason Momoa. Aside from those few things, the dialogue, of course, like I said, is very clunky, very George Lucasy. The chemistry between our leads is very lacking, but it's still enjoyable. Despite the flaws with the script or the flaws with the dialogue, this movie is a technical marvel. The way they pull off these shots and all of the inventive ways that they manage to shoot these sets and shoot these actors in this way that makes this world believable. Now, most of it is CGI, but there's a lot of different technical aspects that they had to like work around just to make these shots work with the actors to make it tie in and be believable with being underwater. And the actors themselves went through a lot to make this happen as well. So I can forgive the dialogue, I can forgive the script, I can forgive the length of the movie and all of that for just the technical and visually stunning marvel that this movie is, and the amount of fun that I had watching it. By the end of the movie, and especially in the third act, this has one of the best third acts in any of these movies that we've even had. The third act in this is a huge CGI spectacle, and unlike Man of Steel, BVS, Justice League, and Wonder Woman, this one works. Everything comes together. It's intense. There's so much fun action. It's not insanely, this is like an Avatar and Lord of the Rings style CGI battle that takes place that just works. The whole conclusion of this film I loved to death. It's finally a third act in a DC movie that I think really sells it. I'm kind of rambling on at this point, but I I recommend this movie. If I had to give it a grade, despite the flaws that I pointed out, I'd give it an 8. I definitely would give it an 8. If the dialogue was a little bit stronger, if the chemistry between Amber Heard and Jason Momoa was a little bit more natural, I would probably give this movie a 10. No joke. This I think this is a good movie. It's definitely a great improvement and a beautiful step forward in this direction for DC going forward, and I hope they carry this momentum. They were getting there with Wonder Woman. Justice League was what it was. I still enjoy it more than most people do, but Aquaman is Aquaman was what it was all going to hinge on, I believe. And they nailed what I think they're going for. And if they keep this pace in this direction, I think there's a lot of good DC stuff coming in the future. In a post Infinity War world, we'll need something to carry on to, and I hope DC finally gets their feet planted firmly on the ground, and we can take off running into this DC world that has been neglected for so long. Cause man, we'll see how it follows up, because Shazam's coming up soon, and I can't wait to check that out as well. I just hope maybe one day we'll get another decent Batman or Superman movie, but here's the hoping. They seem to be shifting away from those characters and exploring some of the more untouched DC properties. So we'll have to see what the future holds over at Warner. For now, we've got Shazam coming up, and then we got Captain Marvel and Infinity War, or I'm sorry, Avengers Endgame coming up. So there's a lot more to look forward to still. So I'll catch you guys next time. Let me know what you think. If you've seen Aquaman, let me know what you thought about the movie. Leave it in the comments. If you want to see my shorter reactions for TV shows, movies, stuff like that, check me out on the Stardust app. And all my links for that, my social media, are down below in the description. But I will catch you guys next time. Later.